You did a really fascinating interview with Jerry Mazinski, who was a retired psychotherapist. Just to some context for the audience, he's a retired psychotherapist who worked for decades with schizophrenics, both in hospitals and in prisons. And he claims that in his experience, the voices that schizophrenics hear aren't hallucinations in their heads, but they're external and they come from, just for lack of a better word, demons. Now this might sound far-fetched for our viewers, but the idea that mental health problems can be as much of a spiritual affliction as well as a chemical one isn't new, is it?
Well, this is the thing. If you go back to your New Testament, back to the Gospels, you will find that Jesus is casting out demons, or in some cases, sending demons into herds of swine and sending them over a cliff. So there would have, I think we can accept, there would have been a time when people were less prone to the cult of scientism, which is what we live in today. Science has become the new religion. So people understood that there were. Well, I mean, as it says in Hamlet, there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy. I think people in the past were much more alive to the idea that there was both a kind of material world and a kind of spiritual world beyond that. And we've had this kind of educated out of ourselves. So this is what was so surprising about my podcast with this guy, Jerry Mazinski, who had a conventional scientific training.
Very
he
well
worked
credentialed.
in hospitals. Oh, right. Well, not just that, but I believe he's won prizes for awards for being the most successful psychiatrist at treating paranoid schizophrenics.
Oh my goodness!
So it's not just he's advancing a theory. He's proving in practice that his methods work. And so this guy found himself working in maximum security prisons and mental hospitals. And he said in prisons they really don't care so much about the inmates. You know, you get much more leeway in your treatments. And one of the big no-nos when in conventional psychiatry, when you are treating schizophrenics, paranoid schizophrenics, you do not ask them about the voices in their heads, because the voices are hallucinations. They're not real. So put out of your head any idea that these voices are real and don't ask them about it. And this guy thought, well, I'm curious what these voices are saying. Anyway, long story short, he discovered that there was a remarkable consistency in what these voices were saying across the US, all the different states he worked in. The stories that these schizophrenics were telling him about the voices in their heads were consistent. And they didn't know each other. They couldn't have met. They hadn't exchanged stories. So this guy was saying, well, how can these people all be having the same? And the voices would do things like they would tell them not to take their meds, not to go to church, not to engage in any kind of anything constructive or any work programs, not to do any reading, not to do anything that might help them. These voices wanted them in an abject state. They wanted, you might argue, to feed on their misery and despair. And that, I think, is what this is what Jerry Mazinski discovered. I mean, you should listen to the podcast and hear for yourself. There's some amazing stories, really weird ones about demons telling a guy about a weed plantation 100 miles away. And the demons guided this guy to this place he'd never been, and he found this weed plantation. Anyway, that's a digression. But Mazinski realized that these voices are entities, demonic entities, and coincidentally, I have a family member whose partner has what he describes as the crappiest superpower in the world. He can see these demons on people. He can't see them all, but he can see these entities. There's 2 or 3 different types he knows. He can see them feeding on people, and some of them have kind of like these suckers that they feed on your emotional energy. Like a leech. I said to him, well, where are these things? He said, well, you particularly encounter them in pub car parks at closing time. They feed on aggression anywhere where people are angry or upset. But this was the funny part. He went with this friend of mine, with his partner, to church once. And he saw that the demons would be left outside the church while everyone went into church. They'd like pets tied up to the walls. I know it sounds crazy.
No, I understand.
But like it says in Hamlet, there is. Yeah. So, demonology, back in the day, 200 or 300 years ago, before the so-called Enlightenment, people were writing books about demonologies. People were much more in tune with what was happening in the spiritual realm, and demons were definitely part of that.